So Nils, welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Well, yeah, because we have no launch site. You have. We have very few space companies. You have. But thank you anyway for allowing me to speak. I've allowed myself to have this to speak both about space and defense, because these things are slightly interchanged. So this will be a slight shift from the wonderful climate tech presentations we've seen now for something really black. So this is what it's about. For the last, maybe I'll go to the next slide actually. For the last 17 years, I've been working at a Danish venture capital fund called Seed Capital, investing mostly in B2B SaaS companies and consumer companies. Many good stories and lots of investment experience, but for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been really tired of just investing in yet another business application or a consumer app. And I was looking for something slightly different. And so for the last, first of all, I tried to persuade my partner colleagues, talk to Magnus at Hello Tomorrow, and had lots of inspiration, but tried to persuade my partner colleagues to look at something else than B2B SaaS and consumer. And the end of those discussions was very fruitful. I had to quit and start my own. And so my background before that also is actually, so basically my background is technical. I was a PhD in software. Then I was a part of some internet startups early on. Not very successful financially, but I learned a lot and had a slight stress problem. So I had to go around the globe with my family to sail for a couple of years to relax, did some fishing. I regard that as my own personal successful startup. We made it back home. We're still a family. My kids still talk to me. And at the same time, I was super fascinated about space. Back to that topic. So I decided to start a venture fund focusing on space investments. Very quickly, that turned into space and defense, because space, a lot of space is inherently dual use. And I must admit also in the recent years, development has turned me from being a total peace dividend guy to somebody who actually believes that we need to invest also in security so that we are able to focus on all the other good stuff that we also want to invest in. So security has become important in my mind. But do I think this is just black? Back to the question you posed, why invest in space? Basically the same question. So defense, there's a security issue, but space to me is both security, but it is also a lot of other things. Actually, defense is the same thing. If you look at where many of the true sort of innovation jumps come from, it's when we invest or have to solve difficult situations. So if we don't clean the air in a capsule when we're an astronaut, we will die of suffocation. If we don't clean our shit, we will also drown in it and die. If we're in a pandemic situation, we'll be killed if we don't fix it quickly. If we're at the front, we'll be killed if we don't solve the problem of drones. And how do humans act in those situations? They innovate really quickly because they have to. In many other situations, they don't really innovate quickly. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems of much climate technology actually, is that there is a really, really urgent problem. All recognize it, all normal people recognize that we have this issue, but it's slightly far in the future. So there is not this absolute, we die tomorrow urgency. And so I think many of the things that if you look at right now, water purification technologies, solar panel technologies, many other technologies that we all now look at as mainstays of the green revolution, they come out of defense projects and space projects where they had to be developed somehow. And then they were commercialized and mature. And I think if you look at some of the coming things, like let's say some of the autonomous developments and acceleration of robotics, I like very much the comment by, I forget the name, the guy that said we will not change. So we have to define tech in order to help us clean the climate because humans will not change. And I think many of the technologies here being developed through black sort of sectors like space and defense will actually help us bring technologies forward that can solve some of the major problems we have. That's maybe slightly naive, but that's my belief. And so there are some things that I think are really, really, truly promising. For example, if you look at one of the projects that is being ridiculed right now, the SpaceX project of going to Mars to have a plan B for the human race. everybody can laugh at that, but if it actually is being implemented, they have to solve the problem of having human beings in a tin can for, let's say, many, many months at a time. That problem has so far been worked on by ESA for 30 years, and they've still not solved it. So you cannot place a sealed off hermetic container in some desert on Earth and have people live in it for 2 years without them dying. That's not doable these days. And so you have to solve that problem in order to go to Mars. And why do I think this is interesting? Well, if you don't solve that problem, you don't really know how a closed loop ecosystem works. And if you don't know how a closed loop ecosystem works, you cannot really solve some of the major problems we have on Earth, because everything we do pollutes. I was at this space convention a year back in Houston, and this old astronaut, he was walking around showing us things, and then all of a sudden he stopped at, I don't know what he was showing, but he said to me, "Do you know this smell of a new car when you come into a new car?" And I said, "Well, yes, it sounds really good. It smells great." I said, "Yeah, well, if that smell is in a capsule, you'll die. Because that's basically gases, gases that come from material. And if they accumulate over long periods of time and are not filtered out, you'll die, right? But on Earth, that's not a problem. You can just open the window and it goes out, and it's not a problem. It just smells nice." So that was a long story about this one slide. And I think this is fundamentally why I feel good about investing in space and defense, because it will bring technologies. It will help some urgent problems, but it'll also bring technologies that further us as humanity. So I've created this fund. So the reason why right now I think this is urgent is that, and why I think in the Nordics we have to think a lot about both space and defense, is that we've all of a sudden, involuntarily, if you will, become center of attention, because the region is placed geopolitically really interestingly to a lot of big players. So we need to invest in making sure we can actually defend this position we have. Otherwise, outside actors, now, and not only the Russians, but maybe also some previous friends, are trying to erode our way of life. And so this is why European defense spending is going through the roof. And a lot of that is going to go into space. And you can, of course, lament the spending on defense and space. At the same time, it will bring a lot of really, really cool, interesting stuff that we can use for good stuff afterwards. So this is what I'm focusing on. Now, lots of money is poured into this area. And I think one of the things I think we discussed at some point, Magnus, was, how can this be interesting to investors? Because you have huge projects by nation states and huge companies. How can small startups play in this arena? Now, in the space sector, this is because due to NASA's opening up for commercial space transportation in the early 2000s, and SpaceX really taking up on that and massively, aggressively revolutionizing space, we've pushed cost to orbit down from $50,000 to $80,000 per kilo to now, let's say, a couple of $1,000s. And if Starship is successful, and it probably will be, it'll be maybe in the hundreds of dollars per kilo. So all of a sudden, if you're a startup and you want to have assets in space, you can do so. I don't know what you'll use it for, but you can do so. It's like opening the gates to the prairie and say, "Here you go. There's an open wide space. Get your carriage going and do something." I think the entrepreneurial activity we'll see in new space is going to be immense, and we're just at the very beginning of that curve. You'll let me know when I'm out of time. Yeah. On the defense side, so this is what's opening up for startups and the startup activity. We're already seeing that. Too little in the Nordics, unfortunately, but hopefully that'll come. Now, on the defense side, the reason why startups are necessary is for two things. One is to, if we have no startup activity in the defense sector, basically all the established industry players will just raise prices, and the increased budgets will be, let's say, wasted as extra margins, and they'll just suck out of the public money. So we need better competition, and you can only do that by introducing new players that challenge the existing players. You also need innovation, which is actually an even more interesting reason. The only way, or the only reason why the Ukrainians are still alive is because they innovate really quickly. At the front, if you have something at the front that works, it will work for 3 to 6 months, and then you'll have to create something new because it'll be obsolete. So you have this vicious cycle of innovation, again, back to the do or die innovation cycle, which requires startup agility and speed. So that's why startups are now being invited to bid into defense projects, and the sector is opening up for them. I have a team around me. I'll not spend too much time on that, but the fund I've raised is a small micro fund focusing on, as I said, defense and space. There aren't that many. In Sweden, you have one expansion, which is actually Swedish and French, but they started out as, like I did, as a small player and grew into a big one. But if you look at the entire European space, there are not that many, and this looks like a busy slide, but if you look this from normal tech or climate tech, it would be, let's say 10 times more complex, or maybe 100 times. There are very, very few players right now in space and defense focusing on this, too few. These are some of the companies I'm looking at. So I'm looking at different things where Spaceline is stratospheric balloons for Earth observation. Nordic Air Defence is out of Stockholm. They do drone defense systems. You have Black Swan Space, is basically autonomous navigation by satellites, stuff like that. I'm running out of time, right? Okay.
3 minutes left.
Okay. No, so this was just to give you an indication of some of the companies that I'm currently looking at. What I think is really interesting right now, coming from software, I love software. There's lots of really good things to say about software. But one of the problems is that modern AI technology has become so good that software can almost automatically be generated. Not quite yet, but close. And so I think if you look at a fund in a 5 to 10 year horizon, which I'm looking at, I'm pretty certain that if you can prompt it, you can generate it in just a few years with respect to standard software. So if you only have software for something, you'll be obsolete. So I think many investors looking at, let's say, business solutions or consumer solutions that are not savvy to the fact that the basic solution is going to be commoditized really quickly, is going to have a problem. So I think what used to be sort of a capex liability, i.e. hardware, real estate, materials, is going to be really interesting for companies to have their software around. So the software accelerates, but you'll have some basic foundational, let's say, if you will, Deeptech differentiators. And I think there was a really interesting quote from Klarna. I think it was part of a marketing gig, but still that they basically wanted to throw out some of their internal systems because they could just generate them. And Satya Nadella from Microsoft said roughly the same thing. So we like real assets in a fund, so not too much pure software. We try to find stuff that comes, this is a busy slide, forget it, but what we do try to find are startups that leverage Nordic region and Nordic strengths to some extent, whatever that means. But we do have some, let's say, some geographic features, some cultural features that play into companies. I think many of the companies I talk to, they have a certain mindset that is Nordic, often very pragmatic and quick, actually, compared to many Southern European companies. And then we have some areas that we're actually quite strong in the region. And I like dual use. I often get asked, do we focus only on defense or space? No, we will take dual use is great, but it doesn't have to be dual use. I would happily look at a company that only looks at defense or only looks at space. And I'll also look at dual use. Many cases will be interesting as dual use because they both have, let's say, civilian and military potential customer groups, which is great, but there might also be really interesting companies that only have single use. And I'll look at those too. So this is where we're at. I'm closing this fund, which is the Final Frontier Liftoff Fund. I'm closing it this month. I'm not quite ready to announce it, but it's super close. I hope to be able to announce it today, but the lawyers wanted it differently, so it's pretty close, and it'll be somewhere between 3 and 5 million euro, and so it'll close in Q2. I'm pretty certain about that, and that's going to be a micro fund. It's a very small amount, but in this area, lots of talk is about private capital trying to drive this development, but very few funds are actually being created. So this in Denmark, it's the first fund focusing on space and defense. Even if I just said defense, it would also be the first fund. So it's pretty crazy, actually, because I would have thought that by now we'd had much more, let's say, private capital ready. So I'm opening up the small one, and the next one hopefully will be in 26, which will be a larger fund. So that's the aim and the ambition. That was Final Frontier.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Obviously, we have to get a question for Nils. Space, defense, it's a lot in store. And I can make a comment. Maybe you know that things is driving the whole idea of Nordic space collaboration. So we had a first event 2 weeks ago about that. And that kind of,
Yeah.
that's
Really
what we
sad I
said
couldn't
how
be
we
there.
met. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Nils.